Cook and clean, you live here for free. Those were the words I heard that morning, standing barefoot in the middle of the kitchen, the kettle screaming behind me like it wanted to warn me. My daughter-in-law said it calmly, as if she were reminding me of the weather. Confident. Unapologetic. And my son stood beside her, staring at his phone, saying nothing at all. She dropped a dirty rag onto the table, the kind I used to wipe their child's hands, and said, "Since you live here for free, you can at least earn it." I noticed the fridge then. A handwritten note taped crookedly near the grocery list. Dishes. Laundry. Floors. At the bottom was a date and a number written hard in pen, an amount I supposedly owed them. I stood there frozen, my coffee mug cooling in my hands, the blue one with the chipped rim I'd owned longer than their marriage. How could they do this to me? If you recognized yourself in this story, you're not alone. Subscribe for quiet truths and hard-earned strength. My name is Margaret Hayes. 63 last spring. For 38 years, I taught 3rd grade in a brick school that smelled of crayons and wet coats. I was the woman who kept extra pencils in a jar, who wrote notes in the margins, who remembered which child needed to sit near the window to breathe. When my husband Peter died, the house went too quiet. The refrigerator hummed, the pipes clicked, and there was nobody to ask, "Tea?" I stayed busy because that is what women like me do. Busy is a kind of grief you can fold and stack. My son Daniel called me Mom in that careful voice he used when he wanted something to sound reasonable. "You don't have to be alone," he said. "We've got the spare room. It'll be good for everyone." His wife Claire smiled while he spoke, but her smile never reached her eyes. She was pretty in a tidy way. Smooth hair, neat nails, a soft sweater even in warm weather. She kept lists. She kept receipts. She kept score. The truth is, I wasn't a guest in their home. I helped them buy that house. Not with a grand gesture, but with the quiet kind of help that doesn't get engraved anywhere. After Peter passed, there was an account he left for me. Money he'd put aside so I would never be cornered. When Daniel and Claire were short for their down payment, I wrote a check. I remember the date because my hand shook. April 12, 2021. $40,000. Daniel hugged me, quick and hard, and said, "We'll make it up to you." "Don't be silly," I told him, because I wanted him to feel like my help was natural, not a debt. That's what mothers do, I thought. We soften the edges so our children don't cut themselves. Then the baby came, my granddaughter Lily, round cheeks, milk breath, that little sigh in her sleep like she was agreeing with the world. Claire went back to work after 3 months. Daniel's job ran long hours. Childcare costs made them flinch. So I moved into the spare room with my one suitcase and my chipped blue mug, and I told myself it was temporary. First it felt like family. I made oatmeal in the mornings. I folded tiny socks. I walked Lily in her stroller past the maple tree on the corner, and waved at neighbors I didn't yet know. I packed Daniel's lunch without thinking and set it on the counter the way I used to set Peter's. But small dismissals have a sound. It's subtle, like a cupboard shutting a little too firmly. Claire would speak about plans without looking at me. "We're doing dinner at my sister's," she'd say, already turning away, and Daniel would add, "You'll be fine here, right?" As if I were a lamp they could leave on. If I offered a suggestion about Lily's nap schedule, or the squeak in the pantry door, Claire would laugh softly and say, "We've got it," in the same tone I used with children who wanted to help sharpen pencils. Daniel started using the word "here" differently. "While you're here, could you? Since you're here, can you?" It was always small. It was always framed like a favor. And I told myself it didn't matter, because I had lived my whole life believing love was something you proved with usefulness. I didn't see, then, how quickly usefulness can turn into a title you can't take off. I look back now and realize they were learning a habit. That I would stay quiet, that I would smooth things over, that I would make their life easier and never ask what it was costing me. And I, too, was learning a habit, one I would have to unlearn. The spare room became your room in their mouths, but not in a warm way. "Your room's light is on," Claire would call from the hallway, as if electricity were a moral issue. She began buying different cereal and placing my oats on the top shelf where I had to stretch. When Lily threw her food, Claire would sigh and slide the tray toward me. "Can you handle that?" she'd ask, already reaching for her laptop. One Saturday I sat at the kitchen table with my feet tucked under me, reading a library book. Claire came in with a basket of towels and set it down like a verdict. "You're home anyway," she said. "Could you start a load?" I heard myself answer, "Of course," before I could decide. Another day, Daniel arrived late, keys jangling, and looked at the sink. "Mom," he said, half joking, "you're the only one who has time for this stuff." He kissed Lily's head and walked past the dishes as if they were invisible. I reminded myself that young parents are tired. I made excuses the way I used to erase chalkboard smudges quickly without thinking. But the air in that house began to change. When I sat down, Claire's eyes flicked to the clock. When I mentioned meeting an old colleague for coffee, she said, "Just don't be gone when Lily wakes up." Even the baby monitor seemed to belong to me. Its light pulsed on the counter like a responsibility that never slept. And I kept trying to be agreeable. I told myself I was lucky to be needed. I told myself that being needed meant I still mattered. Now, the first crack didn't come with shouting. It came quietly, the way a hairline fracture appears in glass and you don't notice until the light hits it just right. At first, the words sounded harmless. "You're home anyway. It's easy for you." Claire said them while scrolling on her phone, while stirring soup, while slipping on her shoes. The tone was casual, almost friendly, which made it harder to push back. Daniel repeated them later, trimmed of feeling like lines he'd memorized. I told myself it didn't matter. I had told myself that before many times in my life. Now I know that's how it always begins. Nothing is demanded outright. It's suggested, assumed, normalized. The first time I heard "cook and clean" without a smile was on a Tuesday. Rain pressed against the windows and Lily was down for her nap. I was wiping the counter when Claire looked up from the table and said, "You can cook tonight and clean up after." Daniel's exhausted. There was no please. No eye contact. Just instruction. I paused with the sponge in my hand. For a moment I thought she might laugh and soften it, the way people do when they realize they've overstepped. She didn't. She simply went back to her laptop. I cooked. I cleaned. I told myself it was one evening. After that, the language changed. "Can you?" became "you need to." "Would you mind?" disappeared altogether. Tasks appeared without explanation, as if they'd always been mine. If I rested on the couch, Claire would glance at me and say, "There's laundry." If I mentioned my knees hurt, Daniel would say, "Well, you're not working anymore." When I stayed in my room to read, Claire knocked once and said, "Lily's awake," then walked away, confident I'd follow. I started waking earlier, trying to stay ahead of the lists I could feel forming. I wiped surfaces that were already clean. I folded clothes that weren't mine. I timed my tea so it wouldn't look like idleness. The phrase "you live here for free" began to hover, unspoken but present. It hung in the air when bills were paid, when groceries were unpacked, when Daniel joked about money. It was implied in the way Claire would say, "We cover a lot," or "This house isn't cheap." I wanted to remind them of the check I'd written, of the nights I rocked Lily so they could sleep, of the years I'd worked standing on tired feet, paying into a life I thought would include respect. But every time I opened my mouth, something stopped me. Habit, perhaps. Or fear of being seen as difficult. Old women are taught early that gratitude is safer than truth. One evening, I sat at the table peeling carrots. My hands were slower these days, the knife heavier. Claire watched me and said, "You should really keep up. We all pitch in here." I looked up at her then. Really looked. Her expression wasn't cruel. It was certain. In her mind, this arrangement made sense. Daniel didn't look up at all. That was the moment I felt myself slipping from person to role. Not mother. Not family. Something closer to infrastructure. Useful when functioning. Not noticed otherwise. I carried the pot to the stove and felt the familiar ache in my wrist. Steam fogged my glasses. I blinked it away and kept going. Later that night, alone in the spare room, I sat on the edge of the bed and listened to the house settle. Pipes knocking. Floorboards creaking. The distant hum of the refrigerator. I realized I was waiting for permission, for thanks, for something to change on its own. Nothing ever does. That was the first crack. I didn't fall through it yet. But the sound it made stayed with me, sharp and unmistakable, echoing every time someone said my name like it came with instructions attached. Slowly, I stopped being a person. I became a role, one that came with expectations but no name. Roles don't get thanked. They get managed. If I rested, I was lazy. Claire would glance at me stretched on the couch and say, "Must be nice." Not unkindly, just observant, as if noting a fact. If I went out even briefly, Daniel would ask, "How long were you gone?" The way a supervisor asks, not a son. The words "you live here for free" followed me everywhere. They weren't always spoken, but they were present, like a sentence I couldn't escape. In the pantry, when Claire reorganized shelves and moved my things aside. In the bathroom, when she sighed about water usage. In the mail, when envelopes addressed to me were placed, unopened, at the corner of the counter. I began to measure myself by their comfort. I timed my showers. I lowered my voice. I stopped inviting friends over because Claire said, "It's just a lot." When I mentioned church, she said, "Just don't make it a whole day thing." I noticed how often I apologized. "Sorry, I'll get that." "Sorry, I didn't realize." "Sorry, I was just sitting." Once I left my scarf on the chair by the door. Claire picked it up between two fingers and said, "We like to keep shared spaces clear." I nodded and took it from her, the wool still warm from my neck. The fridge note appeared gradually. First it was reminders. Milk. Diapers. Then chores crept in, written in Claire's neat handwriting. Dishes. Wipe counters. Vacuum. Each time I erased something, another line appeared, as if the list were growing faster than my hands. Daniel joked about it once. "You're more organized than we are, Mom." He laughed, kissed my cheek and left for work. The notes stayed. I stopped correcting them when they spoke about the house. Our mortgage. Our bills. The check I'd written became invisible, absorbed into the walls like insulation. When I mentioned expenses, Claire said, "Well, we're all adults here." I wanted to ask what that made me. One afternoon, Lily napped longer than usual. I sat at the table with my blue mug, watching dust float in the light. For a few minutes there was nothing to do. No noise. No need. Claire came in, saw me sitting and frowned. "There's always something," she said. "You just have to look." I stood up immediately. That night I lay awake replaying the day. Not the big moments but the small ones, the tone, the pauses, the way my presence seemed acceptable only when I was in motion. I realized I was afraid to be still. The house felt smaller then, not in square footage but in permission. Doors closed more often. Conversations happened around me, not with me. I was informed, not included. Still I stayed quiet. I told myself this was temporary. That family strains pass. That patience is a virtue. But patience, I was learning, can also be a signal to others and to yourself that your boundaries are negotiable. The sentence tightened around me. "You live here for free." It explained everything, justified everything. It reduced my life to a transaction I had never agreed to. I didn't know yet how it would end. I only knew I was disappearing, one small concession at a time, and that something inside me had begun to resist the quiet erasure. That resistance was faint, but it was real. And it was waiting. The betrayal didn't arrive with raised voices or slammed doors. It arrived the way rot does in old wood. Quiet, patient, almost careful. If I hadn't touched the wrong thing at the right moment, I might never have seen it. That afternoon, Claire asked me to find Lily's insurance card. "You're good with paperwork," she said, already turning away, already assuming my compliance. I went to the hallway cabinet where Daniel kept old mail, the drawer that always stuck unless you lifted it slightly. I remember that detail because Peter used to curse drawers like that, say they were a sign of cheap workmanship. When I pulled it open, envelopes shifted. A thin folder slid forward and landed against my wrist. Inside was a bank statement. I recognized the account number instantly. My breath caught, sharp and involuntary, like stepping off a curb you didn't see. That account belonged to me. It was the one Peter had set up years before he died. Sitting at our kitchen table with the afternoon light on his hands, explaining everything slowly. "This is yours," he'd said. "So you'll never be cornered. So you'll never have to ask." I hadn't checked it in months. I trusted it. I trusted my son. The numbers made no sense. There were withdrawals listed in neat, orderly rows. Monthly. Predictable. Always around the 15th. $800. Sometimes a little more. Sometimes labeled transfer. Sometimes not labeled at all, as if names weren't necessary when permission was assumed. I sat down on the hallway chair because my legs no longer felt like instructions I could rely on. I traced the dates with my finger. 1 year. Then another. Then part of a third. Tens of thousands of dollars gone in disciplined pieces, taken carefully enough that I'd never noticed the absence. It wasn't chaos. It was a plan. At the bottom of the page was a name. Authorized signature. Daniel. The house sounded too loud all at once. The refrigerator hummed. The pipes clicked. The baby monitor on the counter carried Lily's breathing into the room, soft and steady, unaware of anything beyond sleep. I noticed the faint lemon smell of cleaner on my hands and the ache in my lower back from standing too long that morning. I didn't cry. I didn't gasp. I didn't feel dramatic or surprised. I felt something colder and clearer settle into place. While they told me I lived there for free, they had been charging me. While I cooked their meals and scrubbed their floors, my son had been paying himself back without telling me. While Claire spoke about fairness and contribution, they had already decided what I owed, and decided I didn't need to know. I opened the drawer again. There were more statements. Older ones. Newer ones. The same pattern repeated like a heartbeat. The dates lined up with memories that suddenly sharpened. Money's tight this month. We're covering a lot. You understand, right? I thought of the fridge note. The chores written neatly. The number at the bottom, heavy with accusation, dressed up as math. My hands were steady now. That surprised me. They hadn't forgotten my help. They hadn't misunderstood anything. They had calculated. They had justified. They had taken advantage of my silence and called it agreement. I folded the statement carefully, aligning the edges the way I used to teach my students to align their papers. Then I slid it back into the folder and placed it exactly where I'd found it. No one needed to know yet that I knew. When I walked into the kitchen, the note was still there. Dishes. Laundry. Floors. That number written firmly without doubt. For the first time, I didn't feel ashamed looking at it. I reached up, peeled it from the fridge and folded it once. Then again. I slipped it into the pocket of my cardigan. I wasn't confused. I wasn't imagining things. I wasn't ungrateful, sensitive, or difficult. I was being used. And the moment I allowed myself to say that, quietly and without apology, something inside me went still and ready. I did not confront them that day. I did not hold the statement up like evidence in a courtroom or ask my son how long he had planned it. I finished the soup. I wiped the counter until it reflected the overhead light. I moved through the evening routine the way I always had, careful, useful, quiet. But something had shifted, and I felt it in my body before my mind caught up. My shoulders were straighter. My hands steadier. As if a weight I had been carrying without knowing it had finally been set down. That night, after the house went still, I sat at the small desk in the spare room. The lamp cast a narrow circle of light, just enough to work by. I took the folded bank statement from my cardigan pocket and smoothed it flat. Then I placed the note from the fridge beside it. They told the same story, the same certainty, the same assumption, the same belief that I would accept whatever was decided for me. I opened my phone and logged into the bank app. I hadn't done that in a long while. The password returned to me instantly. Peter had insisted I choose something simple and permanent, something I would never forget even if everything else changed. The screen loaded slowly, then the numbers appeared, calm and unarguable. Transfer after transfer. Dates aligned with precision. Amounts small enough to hide, large enough to matter. I scrolled carefully, not searching anymore, only confirming. Each line removed another layer of doubt I hadn't realized I was carrying. This wasn't confusion. It wasn't a misunderstanding. It was design. For years, I had been afraid of being seen as ungrateful. Afraid of disrupting my son's life. Afraid of returning to an empty house where the quiet pressed too close. That fear had made me accommodating. It had also made me permissive. Looking at the screen, I didn't feel rage. I felt relief. The kind that comes when you finally know the truth and no longer have to question your own instincts. I wasn't failing them. They were exploiting me. I slept little that night. When morning came, I moved through the familiar motions. Oatmeal simmering. Lily's cup rinsed and set out. Daniel's lunch wrapped and placed by the door. Claire thanked me without looking up, already late, already moving past me. I watched them leave together, keys jangling, voices overlapping, confident in the structure they had built around my silence. When the door closed, the house felt different. Quieter. Not lonely, neutral. As if it were waiting. I sat at the kitchen table with my blue mug, now cold, and made my first call. The bank representative spoke slowly and kindly. I asked precise questions. I wrote notes in the careful handwriting that once filled report cards. I learned what could be frozen, what required signatures, and what protections were already in place. The second call took longer to dial. I called a lawyer Peter had trusted, a number I had kept in an old address book I never threw away. When she answered, I said only, "I need to revoke a power of attorney." There was no surprise in her voice, just professionalism, respect. When I hung up, I noticed my hands were steady. I stood and walked to the fridge. The place where the note had been was blank now, the metal reflecting my face faintly. Older, yes. Tired. But clear. For the first time in a long while, I did not ask myself what they would think. I asked myself what I needed. And the answer no longer frightened me. By Friday, everything I needed to do was arranged, and that was the strangest part of all. How quickly a life can be set back onto its own rails once you stop asking permission. The lawyer's office smelled faintly of coffee toner and peppermint tea. I signed my name where she pointed and listened as she explained my choices in plain language. No scolding. No pity. Just facts. The power of attorney was revoked. Access was removed. New instructions were filed. My signature felt heavier than it used to, but it was steady. After that, I went to the bank in person. I brought my passport, my marriage certificate, Peter's death certificate, papers I kept because he always said, "Keep the originals safe." I watched the teller type, watched the screen turn toward me for confirmation, and nodded once. Alerts were set. Transfers were blocked. A new card was issued. The account stopped being a door Daniel could open whenever he pleased. I did not do any of it out of spite. I did it the way I used to set classroom rules. Calmly, early, and without apology. Boundaries only work when they are clear. Before I left, I handled the practical pieces. I changed my mailing address and asked the post office to forward everything. I confirmed my pension deposits. I booked a small furnished studio near the river. Nothing fancy, just clean sheets, a kettle, and a window that opened. When the woman on the phone asked, "How long will you need it?" I said, "As long as I choose." I also arranged care for Lily, because I would not punish a child for adults' choices. I emailed Daniel one last time, short and factual, listing 3 licensed daycare options I had researched, with dates and phone numbers. No emotion. No reminders. Just information, and then I stepped back. That evening, back in the spare room, I pulled out the suitcase I had brought when I moved in. It still smelled like lavender sachets from my old dresser. I laid it on the bed and packed with the same care I used to fold Lily's tiny shirts. I chose only what was mine. 2 sweaters. My winter scarf. The framed photo of Peter that Claire had tucked behind a stack of board games. I wrapped the frame in a towel and felt my throat tighten. Not with grief, but with recognition. I had been treating my own life like it was an inconvenience. From the top drawer, I took my blue mug, the chipped one. I rinsed it and dried it slowly, then placed it between soft clothes so it wouldn't break. I left the room tidy. I made the bed. I set the lamp back where it had been. Not because I owed them neatness, but because leaving in disorder would have felt like leaving in anger, and anger was not the point. Near midnight, I wrote a short note on plain paper. "Daniel, I know about the transfers. Do not contact my bank again. I will be in touch through my lawyer." That was all. No pleading. No explanations. No arguments they could twist into a debate. In the morning, I slipped my house shoes into the suitcase and left my spare set of their keys on the entry table. I paused by the hallway mirror. My hair had gone more silver than I liked to admit. I looked tired but not weak. I breathed once and lifted the suitcase handle. I waited until Daniel and Claire were rushing. Claire searching for her keys, Daniel checking his phone, Lily clapping at a picture book. The house was loud with their usual momentum. I carried my suitcase to the front door. Claire saw it first. "What's that?" she asked, already irritated, as if my belongings were an inconvenience. Daniel's eyes flicked up. "Mom, where are you going?" I looked at him and felt the old instinct to soften the moment rise in my chest. Then I let it pass. "I'm leaving," I said. Claire opened her mouth. "You can't just." "I can," I answered quietly. Daniel stepped closer, lowering his voice. "Let's talk about this." There's nothing to discuss right now, I said. You made decisions without me. I'm making mine with myself. I took my coat from the hook. My keys felt solid in my palm, the weight of something that belonged to me. I opened the door and cold air brushed my face like a clean cloth. Outside, a taxi waited because I had ordered it the night before. The driver took my suitcase without questions. As we pulled away, my phone buzzed Daniel, then Claire. I didn't read the messages. Not yet. Knowing can wait when you are saving yourself. At the first stoplight, I watched my own reflection in the window, faint over the city street. I thought of Peter's voice, "Keep yourself safe," and of the blue mug cushioned in my suitcase. My hands rested in my lap, steady, the same hands that had raised a child and built a career. They were allowed to choose peace now. I inhaled once, slow and deep, and felt the tightness in my chest finally loosen its grip. Today. And I walked out without shouting, without begging, without looking back, because sometimes dignity is simply doing what you said you would do, even when your voice is calm. The consequences did not arrive with thunder. They arrived like water, quiet at first, then persistent, then suddenly everywhere. 2 days after I left, Daniel's name lit up my phone while I stood at the window of my new studio, watching the river slide past in a gray January light. I let it ring. When it stopped, the silence in the room felt clean like fresh sheets. A minute later it rang again. Then came a text. Then another. I turned the phone face down on the table beside my blue mug and made myself tea. By the end of that week, their life began to stutter. It started with the small failures that people don't notice until they stack. The grocery card declined. The streaming service paused. A delivery app asked for updated payment information. Claire found out first, standing at a checkout with Lily in the cart, the belt moving, the cashier waiting. I could picture Claire's polite smile tightening as she tried again, then looked for another card as if dignity could be pulled from a wallet. Daniel called that night. I did not answer. He left a voicemail that sounded like he was holding his breath. "Mom, something's wrong with the account," he said. "Did you change something? Call me back." The next morning came a message from Claire. Longer, careful, written like a work email. "Margaret, we're confused. There must be a mistake. We're counting on those transfers for household expenses. Please let us know what's happening." Counting on those transfers. As if they were entitled to them. As if my money had become part of their monthly weather. Then daycare became the problem. Lily's childcare was the first thing I had always made sure was settled, because children should not pay for adult pride. Without my presence, mornings stretched into chaos. Daniel had to be at work early, and Claire's meetings were fixed to a calendar that did not care about tantrums or lost shoes. They tried a sitter once, the sitter canceled. They asked a neighbor, the neighbor said no. They arrived late, flustered, and discovered what I had been smoothing over for months without noticing the work behind it. A week after I left, the bigger consequences followed. The mortgage payment did not clear on time. A late fee appeared. The bank sent an automated notice. They could not charm an automated notice. They could not guilt it either. It was just a number and a deadline. Daniel's text changed tone. First confusion, then irritation, then panic. "Mom, this is serious. Why are you doing this? Please call me. We can fix it." Claire tried again, and her apology arrived in pieces, stitched together with stress. "We didn't mean it like that. We were under pressure. You know how Daniel gets about money." And then quietly, "We need help. Need. Not love. Not remorse. Need." They also learned what it cost to replace a person with a service. A cleaner wanted a deposit. A babysitter charged by the hour, and overtime was not negotiable. Takeout became dinner more nights than not. Laundry piled up. The house did not collapse, but it stopped looking effortless. It began to look like a place where two adults were trying to do everything they had assigned to someone else. And then came the public discomfort. Claire's sister asked at a family dinner where I was. A friend from Claire's office mentioned seeing me near the river and said I looked well. Daniel had to answer those questions with his face, not with a text. In the space of a few weeks, they went from being the generous couple who took Mom in to the couple whose mother had quietly moved out and refused to return calls. They even came to my door once. Daniel stood in the hallway with a bag of Lily's crackers, as if small offerings could undo big choices. Claire stayed behind him, arms crossed, eyes scanning my room. "We can start over," Daniel said. "We'll do it right." I didn't argue. I handed him my lawyer's card and said, "Use this." His face tightened with the shock of being redirected away from the old route, straight through me. The first true apology came on a Sunday afternoon. Daniel called and left a voicemail, his voice smaller than I remembered, like a boy who had broken something valuable and was hoping it could be glued back together. "Mom," he said, "I'm sorry. I shouldn't have touched it. Claire didn't know, well, she knew some, but I'm sorry. Can you please come back? Just for a little while. For Lily." I sat at my table and listened once. I pictured Lily's face. I pictured also the fridge note, the rag on the table, the calm sentence, "Cook and clean, you live here for free." Then I deleted the message. Because the natural consequence of treating someone like a tool is that, one day, the tool is not there. And the world does not rush in to replace what you chose to misuse. I did not celebrate their struggle. I simply let it belong to them. I kept my phone face down, drank my tea, and watched the river keep moving, steady, indifferent, and honest about direction. I did listen when they reached out. That was the boundary I chose, and it mattered that it was deliberate. I listened without interrupting, without fixing, without stepping back into the role they had assigned me for years. Listening, I learned, can be an act of distance rather than surrender. Daniel came to see me alone about 10 days after his last message. He stood in the narrow hallway of my building, shoulders slightly rounded, holding a small paper bag with Lily's crackers inside, as if arriving with proof of good intentions. He looked older than his years, the way men do when consequences stop being theoretical and begin to follow them home. I invited him in because civility is not permission, and kindness does not require self-erasure. He sat on the edge of the chair, knees apart, hands clasped, eyes moving slowly around my studio as if he were taking inventory. The clean counter, the single plant by the window, the blue mug on the table. "It's nice," he said, uncertain, like someone complimenting a language they don't speak well. I didn't respond. Silence has always been more honest than reassurance. "I messed up," he said eventually. His voice was flat, stripped of confidence. "I really did. I don't know what I thought." He rubbed his palms together, a nervous habit from childhood. "It was easier this way. You were there. You never said no." He said it as if that explained everything. As if silence were consent. "I didn't say yes either," I said. He nodded slowly, eyes fixed on the floor. "Claire's overwhelmed. Everything's harder now. The mornings, the bills, Lily, all of it." "I know," I said. And I did. Heart has a pattern. It shows up in late notices, in raised voices, in the way people run out of patience when there's no one left to absorb the overflow. He cleared his throat. "She wants to apologize. She didn't realize how it felt." "That's something she needs to sit with," I said. "Not something I need to manage." He looked up at me then, really looked. "What are you going to do now?" I glanced around the room, the afternoon light resting on the floor. "I'm doing it," I said. "This is my life now." He hesitated, then asked the question he'd been holding back. "What about Lily?" I took my time answering. "I love my granddaughter," I said. "But love doesn't mean returning to a place where my worth was conditional. I can love her without disappearing again." That was the moment he understood this wasn't a break or a negotiation. It was a line. After that, things shifted quietly. Claire reduced her hours. Daniel rearranged his schedule. They argued less about me and more about logistics. I heard pieces of it through relatives who suddenly remembered my number and wanted updates, reassurance, something to report back. I offered none. Instead, I settled into the life I had chosen. Morning coffee by the window, walks along the river, volunteering twice a week at the library, shelving books whose spines were softened by years of hands. People there thanked me. They used my name. They didn't expect me to earn the right to exist. I saw Lily again in neutral spaces. Park. A birthday gathering. I hugged her, kissed her hair, and handed her back without staying to clean or organize or smooth anything over. That boundary held, and I felt no guilt. Forgiveness, I learned, does not always look like reconciliation. Sometimes it looks like clarity. Sometimes it looks like refusing to repeat a pattern simply because it's familiar. I did not return. I did not explain myself again. I let distance do the work words never could. And in that space I found something I had misplaced for years, not usefulness, not approval, but myself. I live quietly now, and that quiet has weight to it. It is not emptiness. It is space I was never allowed to take before. I wake without listening for footsteps or requests. I make tea in my blue mug and sit by the window while the river moves past, steady and unconcerned, reminding me that life continues even when you step out of someone else's expectations. No one tells me to earn my place anymore. No one counts my worth in chores, hours, or unspoken debts. My refrigerator holds food, not instructions. My days belong to me in a way I once believed was selfish, and now understand is necessary. Daniel still calls from time to time. His voice is careful. Claire's messages are polite and brief. We exist in a smaller shape now, and that shape is honest. I see Lily when it feels right. At a park, a birthday, a short visit where love is present but obligation is not. I leave before the old pull returns, before I forget myself again. I think often about how easily dignity erodes when kindness is mistaken for availability. How many women are raised to believe endurance is proof of love. I lived that lesson for decades. I taught it without meaning to. I am unlearning it now, slowly, deliberately. Choosing myself did not make me cruel. It did not make me cold. It made me clear. Clear about what I will give. Clear about what I will not accept. Clear about the difference between helping and disappearing. There are still moments of sadness. That is honest too. But sadness no longer lives beside shame. I know now that walking away was not abandonment. It was self-respect arriving late, but arriving all the same. If anyone ever looks at you and says you must earn your right to exist in their life, remember this. Dignity is not rent. Love is not labor. And silence should never be the price of belonging. I did not raise my voice. I did not punish anyone. I simply stepped out of a place that required me to be smaller than I was. And in doing so, I found something I thought I had lost. My own voice, steady, unafraid, and finally my own. If this story touched a nerve, you belong here. Subscribe to hear truths where silence becomes strength.